joining us, that would be fantastic. As people join, I'm going to introduce myself and then introduce myself again. My name is Dr. Natalie Barnett, and I'm the Director of Clinical Research here at Nanit. And I'm going to be joined today by Dr. Monica Ordway, a member of our Medical and Scientific Advisory Board here at Nanit, who works at Yale University, and Dr. Krupa Playforth, a pediatrician and mum of 3 and founder of the Pediatrician Mom. So and we're going to be answering sort of lots of questions today, talking about sleep. And so if you wanted to, as you're joining, tell us where you're joining us from, pop into the chat. Colorado, Arizona, fantastic. I love it.
Canada.
Oh, Canada, yay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Tennessee, great.
Oh, it's
Florida.
all over. I love
everywhere.
this.
That's awesome. Fantastic. We'll just give everyone
Sydney.
a minute or so to join. And then we'll get started. So you may have seen a poll popped up on your screen. If you could let us know if you are expecting or if you have a baby, if you currently use a sleep trainer, and a few other things in the poll. So if you wanted to answer that, that would be fantastic. And we'll get started fairly soon. My name is Dr. Natalie Barnett, and I'm the Director of Clinical Research at Nanit, and I'm going to be joined by Krupa Playforth and Monica Ordway from Yale. And we are going to be talking today all about baby sleep. And we're really excited to be sponsored by, this webinar is going to be sponsored by Nanit and Newton Baby and Coterie Diapers. So thanks to Coterie and Newton for putting this all together for us. This webinar is going to run for about an hour. And we have still more people joining, and I'm so excited to see where everyone's joining, which is fantastic. So I think we'll probably think about getting started. Again, my name is Dr. Natalie Barnett. I am the Director of Clinical Research at Nanit. I am joined this evening by Dr. Monica Ordway, a member of the Nanit Medical and Scientific Advisory Board and a researcher and clinician at Yale University, and by Dr. Krupa Playforth, a board-certified pediatrician and mum of 3 and founder of the Pediatrician Mom. And we are known for sleep at Nanit. And so tonight we're going to be answering all sorts of questions about baby sleep. And so a little bit of housekeeping to get started. I want to thank our sponsors, Nanit, Newton Baby and Coterie, for pulling this webinar together. And we expect the webinar to go for about an hour. We will have a special offer from all of these sponsors at the end, which we will let you know about. I want to make sure that you know that you can submit any questions that you have for us in the Q&A session, and not in the chat, but in the Q&A, if you could do that. And we hope to get to as many questions as we can. And if you have to jump off, or if you have friends who didn't get to see the webinar, or if you want to share it with others, we'll be sending through a replay link to your email to everyone who registered for the email for the webinar. So I would like to just take a couple of minutes now for Dr. Playforth and Dr. Ordway to just tell us a little bit about themselves. Oh, Dr. Ordway, can we start with you?
Sure, no problem. Well, first I want to say in the introductions that I'm also a mother of 2 boys. So I have been busy with that as well, but I am currently an associate professor at Yale School of Nursing, where I conduct research in early childhood in the first 1,000 days of life. And I look at biobehavioral research, which means that I look at biomarkers of stress response and sleep, and how sleep can protect children from experiencing adversity or any other negative experiences early in life.
Great, thank you, Dr. Ordway. And I will just mention that Dr. Ordway and I are just back from an amazing time at the World Sleep Congress in Rome, where we presented some results of some of our research, which was very well received and really a pleasure and a privilege to be able to present. And Dr. Playforth, can you tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
Yes, so I'm a board certified pediatrician, as you mentioned, and a mom of 3. My youngest is almost 8 months old, so I think I'm probably right in the thick of it with a lot of people that are watching. You know, I created the Pediatrician Mom because I felt like there's a lot of misinformation online, and a lot of, even with pediatrician visits, I think that sometimes practical answers aren't always there. So I'm trying to create a resource that's evidence-based, but also just nuanced and practical, you know, from the perspective of somebody who's kind of in the trenches with you, answering just common parent questions.
Yeah. So to that point, can I ask you the first question? And can you tell us, you know, in your experience and with your expertise, tell us what role does sleep play in, you know, growth and development?
Yeah, so I think, you know, anyone who's watching this probably understands that high quality sleep of the right duration is critical for growth and development, especially in that early infant period. And there are studies that actually show that that is independently true of naps and nighttime sleep. So both are important kind of in their ways. But we know that, you know, as infants and toddlers grow, the physiology of their sleep changes. We know that growth hormone is secreted during certain phases of sleep at night. And so that's why when people have a baby that's having a growth spurt, you often have that period of intense feeding and then a period of longer sleep, because that's, you know, the baby's body is kind of putting those calories to work. And then cognitively as well, you know, learning, concentration, memory consolidation, all of these things are happening during sleep. So it's really important.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And so Monica, Dr. Ordway, can I just ask you, if you're seeing families in the clinic who have newborn babies, what is the most common advice that you're giving, you know, parents of newborns?
Sure. And I should mention that too. And I did mention it in my introduction that I also see patients in the sleep clinic as I have an appointment with the med school as well. So I'm a nurse practitioner in pediatrics. And I would say the most important thing is, I think the first 3 weeks, in combination with my experience as a lactation consultant and as a sleep specialist, I think it's really important to sort of be okay with not having a schedule. Like those first 3 months, there's only 2 phases of sleep. And for us, for children over, say 3 to 4 months, and adults, there's 4 stages of sleep, but only 2 in that infancy period. So it's really difficult, it's not really even possible for them to sleep through the night. Not that some don't, but that, so I find just being able to be comfortable with a lack of structure, which can be very difficult. And to try to really sleep when the baby is sleeping during the day, because it's very common those first 3 weeks for babies to be up more during the evening and sleep more during the day.
Yeah, which will change over time. But, you know, as they start to produce melatonin and around the, 6 to 8 week mark, things will, we will start to see some sort of difference between day and night. But it's, in those first few weeks particularly, it can be. And the other thing that I will often say to parents is that, most newborn babies really can't self-soothe, and you need to be the one soothing them. So that is the time where I want you to be rocking that baby, holding that baby, shushing that baby, doing what you need to do to keep that baby calm and keep that baby happy. You're not going to be creating any bad sleep habits, by doing that. Your baby needs you, in those first few months. And then, as they start to get a little bit older, which you guys can, both speak to, we can start to see a little more sleep independence. But those first, few months particularly, we don't want you to be feeling guilty about holding those babies and rocking them and, keeping them calm as you need to. So, but we know that, getting a baby to sleep can be incredibly overwhelming and stressful. And I will always say that I think that, developing a bedtime routine is going to be one of the best things that you can do to help get your babies to sleep. But Dr. Playforth, what would you say to that, and how would you recommend that people, start to think about a bedtime routine, or when would you suggest that they start a bedtime routine?
I love that. I think that especially for someone who, I'm a type A person, a lot of first-time parents will come in having read some books, and they'll be really worried about setting up, bad cycles or sleep crutches and things like that initially. And so they'll be really feeling a lot of guilt about the rocking and the soothing. But I agree with you. Enjoying your baby in those first few weeks and doing all those things is really important for everybody. And then later on, what we see is that there is scientific evidence that shows that babies who have a good bedtime routine, a consistent bedtime routine, end up having better, higher quality sleep compared to babies that don't. And I wouldn't say that you necessarily can create a solid routine before the age of, 4 to 6 months. I think getting some patterns in place, but being okay when those patterns aren't always going to plan is the way to go in the first few weeks to months of life.
Yeah, and I think people can put a lot of unrealistic expectations on themselves. And I think it's important for people to understand that really, in those first 3 to 4 months, it can be really hard to have any sort of a routine. And Dr. Ordway, what would you say to that? When would you recommend that people start thinking about a bedtime routine, and what do you suggest that they do for a bedtime routine?
Sure. I think you want to start a bedtime routine even before you even think about sleep training. So, we typically wouldn't start to talk about sleep training until closer to 6 months or so. And I think one of the things I think is really powerful is for yourself to get in the habit as a parent. I like to recommend a mantra, something like, "Good night, I love you, I'll see you in the morning." And when you repeat that every night, you get in the habit yourself, and you're sending your child a little message that sort of signals time to go to sleep. As Dr. Barnett said, we were in Rome, and there was a fantastic video, sort of a comedy shown of a New Zealand dad who his baby was in the crib, and he would say shh, and the baby would drop down and lay down in the crib, and he'd say good night, and baby would drop, and it was such a joy. Everything, and that was just sort of because that baby kept hearing the same thing over and over again. So come up with some type of mantra. Keep the bedtime something simple, 3 or 4 activities at the most, that doesn't include, dancing around the room, but kind of quiet. And then setting them down, a little bit awake, drowsy but awake, and good night, I love you, I'll see you in the morning. And that's just a great signal, I think, to let the child know it's bedtime, you love them. And just like you wouldn't give your child 5 cookies after they keep asking for it, you don't necessarily have to keep going and responding to ever for the older. This is older children, not the newborns. But every time they ask for another hug, think about it like that chocolate chip cookie.
Sure. Okay. Amazing. And so, in thinking about putting your babies down and thinking about their sleeping environment, how, Dr. Playforth, what do you typically recommend for families in terms of creating a safe sleeping environment?
Yeah, so the AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, has a list of safe sleep recommendations that are evidence-based that you can actually kind of head over to their website to see. But the basics are, there's really good evidence for babies sleeping on their back every single time on a firm, flat sleep surface with nothing else in that sleep environment. There's also evidence to support avoiding smoking exposure during pregnancy and afterwards, using a pacifier at the onset of sleep. I find a lot of parents are fearful of introducing a pacifier because, again, they're worried about it being a crutch later or worried about having to wean it, but there is data to support, use it, it's okay. Keeping up with preventive care, breastfeeding, these are all things that we do know that there's evidence for. Room sharing is a question that I get a lot, and I'm actually curious about your thoughts. The AAP recommends keeping the baby's sleep area in your room for the first 6 months minimum, and ideally for a year. I'm curious about what your experience has been with that.
Dr. Ordway, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, sure. No, it's a great question, and it's definitely caused a lot of controversy among sleep specialists and pediatric healthcare providers. So I think it's most useful to understand or explain a little bit why we were concerned about it. The main concern is that sort of that sleep association that can happen. And that's probably the most common type of insomnia or difficulty for children to fall asleep, is that they expect the parent to be present, or they want to fall asleep in the same way that when they wake up, they want to see the same thing when they fell asleep. And with every sleep cycle, and they're going to have at least 5 or 6 sleep cycles, if not more, during the night, when they consolidate their sleep, there's a micro arousal that happens. So they wake up just a little bit at the end of each cycle. And we also wake up. Nobody sleeps 100%, no matter how solid you think you slept. Your sleep efficiency is usually somewhere between 80 and 90%. So you're awake about 10% of the time. And so you don't remember that. And so when children wake up and they see, or babies wake up and they see that their parent isn't present, they will signal for them, right? If that's how they know to fall asleep. So there's that. And the other thing where they commonly wake up is, and that's where you can see sort of that shift in that 4-month regression, or even later on with different developmental milestones, as they start to experiment with standing up. They might stand up in the crib during one of those micro arousals, and the parent starts to see that in the room and starts that panic, like, oh my God, they're going to wake up. Oh, I'm not going to get enough sleep. And whereas if they just sort of let that go, when it didn't, they could realize that that's just them practicing standing up. They don't necessarily have to go to that's not a cue necessarily. And so recognizing that as they master different developmental milestones, that can wake them up as well.
Yeah. And look, and we're working with some researchers who are looking at that exact thing, who are looking at the effect on sleep of developmental milestones. And it's a fairly well-known phenomenon that babies that their sleep is disrupted when they're reaching their motor milestones. But what is not well understood really is exactly why, or exactly what they're doing when they're during these times when their sleep is disrupted. So we will hopefully have a few more answers on that in the coming years.
Natalie, just to add one thing that I think would be interesting to the attendees here tonight is that you're all using the Nanit. And when I first started working with Nanit, had my administrative assistant, she had a new baby and a few months old. And so I asked if she wanted to use the Nanit and let me see what it looked like. And she told me she couldn't believe how many times her child woke up at night that she never knew about. And they weren't necessarily cueing her. And so with the rooming in, you can imagine if you're seeing it more often, that's the part that we were worried about. It's not that we don't want children to be bonded with their parents or to be near their parents, absolutely. But we just want to avoid the anxiety that it can sometimes produce in the parent.
Totally. And in terms and thinking about that sleeping environment, Krupa, have you seen any in your practice? Are you seeing any unsafe practices or hearing about any unsafe practices that are bothersome to you?
I think that actually the thing that is most bothersome to me is that I'm hearing from my followers that a lot of parents don't feel comfortable being open and honest with their pediatricians. There are parents that are, co-sleeping, so sleeping in the same space. And I don't know very many pediatricians that are not concerned about that. I mean, I personally have lost patients to that. So I'm concerned about it, but I also get it, and when I had my first, I definitely wanted to, at some point I was so tired. It was just really, really tempting. And I get that, but your pediatrician wants to hear what's really going on so that they can talk you through kind of how to troubleshoot it. Because, your goal ultimately is to have a thriving kid and a safe kid. But I think co-sleeping is probably the thing that I'm most concerned about. All the rest, I think is easier for parents to manage and to kind of stick to the guidelines. But that one can be confusing and hard.
And I think it's a really, really great point to be as honest and open with your pediatrician as you can, because they're there to help you. They only want the best for you and the best for your baby. And they're going to be able to guide you if you look. And for some families, co-sleeping is their choice, but for most families, they end up co-sleeping not because they've wanted to be co-sleeping, but they were exhausted, the baby was breastfeeding and they fell asleep, and it ends up being that's how the only way the baby will fall asleep. So I think it's really important, to your point, to be as honest and open with your pediatrician as you can. So I think that's a great one. And I just wanted to mention again that the sponsors of the webinar this evening are Nanit and Newton and Coterie. And so I don't know if you know many people who are using the Newton mattress, but it is gorgeous. So it's 100% breathable, 100% washable, and it's Green Guard Gold certified. So, and it really is a beautiful, beautiful mattress. So I'm not sure if your patients are talking about it or if they're using it at all, but it's really, really lovely. So, and also I wanted to mention Coterie. Their diapers are amazing. I was talking to a colleague today who was saying they're the softest diapers that she's ever touched, and she said she just will not use anything else. She said they just feel like just something very, very soft. So and she said she just feels very good about putting them on her baby. So I was very happy to chat to her about those diapers today. And of course Nanit, our the company that I work for, which, and I'm pretty sure everybody on the webinar has a Nanit, and we're known for sleep, and sleep, we really understand that sleep is as important to your baby as nutrition and exercise, and that is really why I'm here at Nanit, to really help families understand that sleep is just such a foundational pillar of your baby's health, and I'm so proud and so happy that you are all focusing on sleep, and that sleep is a priority for your families. So, which is amazing.
I personally, I'm sorry to interrupt, but and nobody has actually told me to say this, but I love the Nanit, not just because it is helpful, but also because I'm intellectually curious, and you get to see these patterns. It's just really interesting to see what's going on when you're not, watching your baby the whole time.
Yeah. And I want to move on to talk a little, to get to people's questions and help really parents, sort of get a little bit ahead of perhaps their sleep regressions. So Krupa, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, people talk a lot about sleep regressions, and I'm wondering if you can talk to it a little bit, and, when are they likely to happen? What can you typically do to deal with a regression?
Absolutely. So, I think a lot of why sleep regressions happen remains unknown, right? There's a lot of controversy around the specifics of it. We know that, for example, this pattern of sleep cycles change around 4 months of age, and that's often a time when there's a lot of growth and development happening, but not every baby has a regression. I think that recognizing that growth and development are happening all the time, and that sleep in babies just isn't a linear process. People search for patterns, they try to find patterns. I think that there are probably some, but it's not so textbook and black and white for every baby.
You said that. I love that.
They haven't read the book.
So Dr. Ordway, what do you say to people who are having, for example, who had a baby who was sleeping very well and then all of a sudden is not sleeping so well? What are your typical or go-to, questions or, suggestions for people who are dealing with these sorts of sleep regression?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting is that, the sleep recommendations in terms of sleep duration change around 4 months. And so that drop in about an hour of sleep duration can feel really big, right? It sounds like it's, think about it for yourself. If you lost an hour of sleep, a night, you're going to feel it, right? So I think a lot of times I find that I'm helping parents understand the physiology and sort of, just to help it's not necessarily going to solve the problem, but I think if people understand why something is happening to the best of our ability, like, Dr. Playforth said that we don't know all the reasons, but there are some significant changes in brain development, and in sleep cycling, and as well as nutrition, especially if you're breastfeeding exclusively. There is a different, composition of the breast milk. So there's a lot of nuances that I tend to spend a lot of time kind of getting some of that detailed information. Not that we're here talking about lactation, but something that I see a lot is people might have started pumping and storing milk in the first 6 weeks or so. and then they're giving that milk around they're, using up what's in the freezer. And those first 6 weeks or so, that nutrition, that the composition of that breast milk is really specific for those first 6 weeks. And I'm not saying at all to discard it or not to use it at 4 months, but there may be some nutrition reasons why there might be a regression.
That's a really great point. That's a really great point. And also to Dr. Playforth, I see a couple of questions in the chat about reflux. So can you talk a little bit about how to recognize reflux, and how are you typically, in your practice, how are you typically treating reflux, and how long does it usually take to be resolved?
Reflux is so hard. I think a lot of parents with reflux babies are desperate because those babies, every time you lay them down, they're arching their backs, they're crying, they're spitting up, and you're worried about their breathing. I had 3 reflux babies, so I get it.
Oh.
And I think, you can end up kind of falling into these patterns where you think, okay, well, there are products that are sold to, for example, incline the head of the bed. And so if they're sold, they must be safe. They're not. They're not safe. And actually, the data does not show that those products ultimately make that much of a difference. But we do know that those products do make a difference for sleep safety. The trajectory of reflux is such that it tends to get worse before it gets better. And a lot of babies around the 4 to 6 month mark, you might see a lot of worsening of the reflux because they're sort of moving around more. It's almost like if you have a plastic bottle and you kind of squeeze it in the middle, so things are more likely to go up. And so, that happens at the same 4-month sleep regression time. And I think those parents become increasingly desperate. So that's when I start to see maybe some of the reliance on these sleep props that aren't safe.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really great point. And Dr. Ordway, do you have anything to add to that?
I think everything you said, Dr. Playforth, is correct, and most helpful. And then just in terms of being concerned, I think keeping an eye on weight, especially in those first couple of months. And as long as, your baby's gaining weight, that, it becomes more of an unpleasant piece of, thing to be happening, but less concerned in terms of a health and growth and development perspective, which is what we're most worried about in these first, 1,000 days of life.
Yeah, and to that point, Dr. Ordway, there's a question in the chat that I just wanted to mention. In your opinion, and based on your research, will you wake a sleeping baby to feed them at night? My daughter is 10 weeks, does have slow weight gain, but puts on weight every week. We've been adding breast milk top-ups on top of breastfeeding, etc. And we've just realized it's her body. I still feed her 6 to 7 times a day.
Yeah, so I usually talk about feedings in terms of how many feedings in a 24-hour period. So I would recommend that you aim for 8 to 12 feedings in a 24-hour period at those first, 2 to 3 months. The only time I would wake a sleeping baby would be before they regain their weight. So in that first 10 to 14 days, I would wake a child, or if your pediatric health provider has recommended that you do that because the weight gain isn't fast enough. So I think there's the thing I really see can get really fast behind the 8 ball is if parents are baby's not gaining enough weight in those first 10 to 14 days, and they're so exhausted, and so parents are just relieved for any amount of sleep. But what happens is really a fast down, in the 24 hours, things can go awry. And if you just kind of can keep those feedings up, you're going to see much faster sort of regulation of everything. So the only time I can think of that I would really recommend it would be before they, gain their birth weight.
No, that's a really great point. And I can see there's lots of questions in the chat that are asking about, about sleep and lengthening of sleep and when to sleep train and all sorts of different things. And I just wanted to, the one thing that I wanted to say was that if we're thinking about, sleep training, or your baby sort of learning how to, fall asleep by themselves or start to do these longer stretches at nighttime, to me, the most important thing that you can get that baby to do is have them fall asleep by themselves at the beginning of the night. So, and I don't want to even try doing that really before 4 months. Maybe occasionally that you would try it before 4 months, but at around the 4-month mark, assuming your baby was born on time and your baby is healthy, I think it's a great time to start thinking about having them fall asleep by themselves in the crib at the beginning of the night. And I see that once babies can do that, once they have mastered that skill, it is much easier for them to get themselves back to sleep when they wake up during the night. And we see those nighttime stretches start to lengthen right away. And to Dr. Ordway's earlier point, if the baby needs something when they wake all of these times during the night, if they need something that they had at the beginning of the night that they don't currently have, they're going to be calling out for you and needing that thing to get themselves back to sleep. And it's very frustrating for them. We don't want your babies to be frustrated. We want them to go into the crib, see that they know that they have everything that they need to get themselves to sleep, typically see that it's dark, perhaps hear a white noise machine, and know how to self-soothe and give them the opportunity to work out how to get themselves to sleep. Once they can do that, they're going to start sleeping through the night really, really quickly. And so I think, to me, that's the most important thing that they can do. If we're thinking about, and look, it depends on your personal preference and personal style as to when you would start having them do that or how you would start having them do that. But whatever you're comfortable with, all of these methods of, sleep training per se are going to work. Some of them may take a little bit longer than others, but as long as you're consistent, your baby is going to learn how to fall asleep, and then they're going to start to sleep through the night fairly quickly. But Dr. Playforth, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
I think that, following your instincts a little bit on this, we talk a lot about, 4 months is the point at which the earliest point where we might consider doing some of this stuff. But some parents and some babies are not ready until they're 6 months or 8 months or 10 months. And if that's your family, that's okay. The point at which you're ready is the right point to do it.
Yeah, I completely agree. But what I don't want is parents expecting that their 4-week-old is going to sleep 12 hours a night, because that is just not a realistic expectation. But look, for most babies between 6 and 8 months are capable of going through the night without a feed. So, and a lot of babies will do it earlier than that for sure. So, but I think that a lot of people have an unrealistic expectation of what sleep may be for those, for those first few months. So, Dr. Ordway, do you have any tips and recommendations for parents other than napping when the baby naps? A lot of us are back at work, and we may not be able to nap when the baby naps. Are there any other, suggestions or recommendations that you would have for helping families deal with?
Sure. And let me clarify that the nap when the baby's sleeping is the first 3 weeks, because of that time period when it's common that babies are awake more at night and asleep more during the day. And so hopefully our maternity leave is pathetic here in the United States, if I may say, but I hopefully we are giving you at least 6 weeks. So once you go back to work, certainly I think that changes. But in terms of managing so the question is about managing parents' sleep or the night wakings?
How would you, what suggestions do you have for parents on dealing with dealing with this lack of sleep or dealing with this, huge change in their lives?
It's massive, right? It's massive. And next month, my children will be turning 17 and 20. And so it is definitely interesting to think back at those times. But so even though it's been a while, I clearly remember. So sometimes I feel like if I could give you a crystal ball so you could see that it's going to get easier, I wish I did. Yeah. But that's where I really go back to that physiology piece. And I feel like there's a bit of knowledge is power. And I think it can be very reassuring to parents to understand, again, what I mentioned earlier about the brain development and sleep stages, that it really cannot train a baby before that 3-month mark if there is, because they just don't have the sleep cycles yet. Not to say that there might not be someone, just like anything in our, in our life, that some people, are skinny all the time, and some people have trouble with their weight. I mean, there's like lots of physiology that we don't quite understand, right? It can change, but it's sort of futile to try to do it before the 3 months. And I think that bedtime routine, I just have to go back to that if you can sort of give yourself the space to have 20 minutes with your baby or child before you go to bed, to make that downtime for yourself and for your baby, it can just be so rewarding. So I used to sing Hush Little Baby to I was not a sleep specialist when my kids were babies, but I do remember distinctly singing Hush Little Baby, and I do not have a good voice, but the boys, I have 2 boys, they very much looked forward to me singing that. And I recognize now that that's just sort of that habit and comfort that they felt. I do also I know people are supposed to be putting into Q&A, but there was something in the chat that I think is important to notice, that you had mentioned about as long as baby's healthy. And a mom had asked about, or a parent had asked about premature babies. And I really want to acknowledge how difficult that, and we're talking very much a lot about, we haven't mentioned that very much. And so I just want to say that I would, in those first few months, really, and I'd love to hear what Dr. Playforth said as well, thinks as well, but I would look at from the expected date of delivery, and sort of what the corrected age. And that's when
so to that point, we have a question in the chat about how long do we look at corrected age in terms of sleep? Dr. Playforth, do you want to answer that one?
So I think it depends a lot on what else is going on with the baby. So for example, a lot of premature babies are more likely to have reflux. And as we know, reflux affects sleep. And so I hesitate to put a number on it, because I do think it's a little bit contextual, but I agree that we're looking at the corrected age. So if you have your actual age of the baby in weeks minus how many weeks preterm they were, that gives you your corrected age. Now, not every baby is going to be at that corrected age. Some of them actually, especially if they weren't all that premature, some of them will kind of follow a more traditional trajectory, but your expectations just kind of have to be a little bit different. Also, we were talking about growth charts and weight gain. The premature babies, a lot of times for the really premature babies, they are on a more strict, feed every 3-hour type schedule. And that's what your pediatrician or your pediatric health care provider wants you to do. And that's going to affect how you handle sleep too. So I think it depends a little bit on context.
Yeah. I think that's a really great point. And so I'm just seeing in the chat right after the adjusted age question, there's a question about shift workers. And Dr. Ordway, I'd love you to tackle this one. Both of us parents are shift workers in healthcare. What general strategies do you have to optimize babies and their own sleep?
So that's a tough one. And I actually have just designed a sleep health intervention, and I was just recording my section on circadian rhythm and on sleep-wake cycles. And so shift work is always a challenge. And so that's probably difficult to answer in this context, because it would be interesting to know. I'd have questions about who is caring for the child. Really, it comes down to what is the schedule that you have for your baby around your shift work. So, my best friend from college was worked the night shift for nursing. And so her care provider would come over, be ready there for 7 o'clock, and there would still be a bedtime routine. So I think it's just, that's a difficult one, I think, to answer over a webinar, but I would just suggest that there is a circadian rhythm. There is a biological clock that is regulated by sleep-wake cycles. That's regulated by light and darkness.
Okay, so to that point, someone else is asking, is there a bedtime that is too late?
I'll take that one, just because that's very much in my area of research right now. And I would start with saying to you that it's really wild to think about this, but it wasn't until June of 2021, that the first definition of pediatric sleep health was actually put into a peer-reviewed journal, which is crazy. But the most important part of that is that sleep health is multidimensional. So it goes by SATED. It's behavior, satisfaction, alertness, timing, efficiency, and duration. So we spend a lot of time talking about duration, but there are other dimensions of sleep. particularly what I've been finding, so my research is, I collect data, objective data, using an actigraph, so sort of a research grade accelerometer, to look at sleep patterns. And what I found is that sort of 3 patterns. I have children, 12-month-olds that are going to bed around 8 or 9, another group that are going to bed around 11 or 12 p.m., and another group that's sort of all over the place. And what I'm finding is that bedtime variability is it's much more predictive of the biological outcomes that I'm measuring. And so why I'm sharing
as opposed to the actual bedtime. So it's the variability as bedtime, which is really
interesting.
So it comes back to
the shift. I just want to say lastly, this goes back to a little bit of that shift work question, because I think it's important that we understand that so the intervention I've developed is very much individualized. So it's really tailored to what's going on in the family, because if I have a family who's 12-month-olds going to bed on average at midnight, I can't just tell them to go to bed before 9. There's a cultural or a contextual reason why they're going to bed at midnight. So we work on improving the bedtime, maybe 45 minutes, to get 45 minutes more of sleep, because we know that benefits health. So I think that variability piece, if I can't get the bedtime to be before 9 o'clock, then the next goal is to have a consistent bedtime, plus or minus 30 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. But look, I mean, in general, we really would love our babies to be going to bed somewhere between 6 and 8 p.m. if we can, ideally, and we know that there are lots of different family circumstances that may not make that possible. But if you could aim for somewhere in that sort of range, it would be a fantastic place to start. If you can't get there, to Monica's point, whatever you can do to be as consistent as you can about that bedtime would be great. We've had a few questions in the chat, Dr. Playforth, which I'll get you to address, that are asking about, older babies, 10 months, 12 months, 16 months, who are waking up to feed in the middle of the night. How do we get rid of those middle of the night feedings for those older babies?
So I think it depends a little bit on how the feeding is going and how the weight gain is going, and whether or not they actually need that. Now, I've got to say, there are very few babies beyond about a year of age that really need the calories at night. Most of the time after a year, we want their calories to be coming from solid food anyway. So any milk that they're getting is just sort of an adjunct. So I think the first thing to do is just to kind of decrease the reliance on that. And a lot of times the buy-in from the parents is really the most important thing here, right? Because they're the ones that are kind of in control. If for some reason your pediatrician wants your baby to be feeding at night, that's a sort of different situation. But I think for most of the people that are asking these questions, it's more of just kind of a pattern. The closer babies get to age 2, the more reliant they are on any of these sort of habitual comfort measures and items and patterns. And so if you want to get rid of that, probably sooner is better than later. So I would say, if you can get rid of those feeds between the 12 to 15 months, and that may be going cold turkey, that may be, it depends whether you're doing nursing or a bottle, it may be that you're just decreasing the duration of it, or letting them kind of wait a little bit longer before you actually intervene. There are various gentle methods to do it, but it's rare that a baby truly needs that after a year of age.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right. I love that. Dr. Ordway, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's all covered.
Okay. All right.
But I love how we started off with, it depends. And I think to not feel discouraged by that, but to recognize that there is such variability. And so these webinars are fantastic. But if you are interested, there are many sleep health providers that you can reach out to. If you're finding that your pediatric primary care provider isn't able to address them, just to encourage you to reach out.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. Your pediatrician is there or your primary care provider is there to help you and wants you to succeed as a parent and as a family. There's a few questions around naps, and I know that naps can be incredibly frustrating to families when their baby is sleeping very well at nighttime, but the naps are a little bit harder during the day. And we know that naps can really take a lot longer to develop than night. So it could be that your baby is sleeping beautifully 12 hours during the night, but those naps are still, inconsistent during the day. What do you say to families, Dr. Playforth, who are in that situation where they're, where they're struggling with naps during the day, whether it be their, these shorter naps if the baby is, 3, 4, 5 months, or inconsistent naps, but the baby is sleeping very well at nighttime?
We're actually right in that right now. I would say that taking a kind of close look at what is happening around those naps, you may find that there are certain naps in the day where you're having a little bit more trouble. But, making sure that your baby is well fed, kind of having a mini routine, even as they go down for the nap, you're trying to kind of get them used to seeing the crib, if that's where they are, as sort of a place to sleep, a place to rest. So, I'm not saying you have to do obviously a bath or anything like that, but even just a little bit of quiet time, a little bit of downtime before you go into that nap. The other thing is making sure that you're not jumping in to intervene when they wake up, as they're transitioning through that sleep cycle. So particularly around the 20 to 40 minute mark after about 4 months of age, that's when they're transitioning through that first sleep cycle. And as you said, a lot of babies actually arouse. Everybody arouses at that time. But if they arouse and they cry a little bit and you jump to intervene right away, you're not giving them the opportunity then to resume sleep.
Okay. All right. Great. And know that with, consistency and with time, these naps will do become more consistent. And also I would encourage people to look at the sleep schedule generator that we have on the Nanit website. So it's a really nice resource too, to give you sort of the opportunity to, it gives you a guide as to when your baby should be feeding and sleeping during the day, because it can, it could be that your baby is, ready to transition from 3 naps down to 2, or from 2 naps down to 1, or you've started solids but they're not getting enough solids, or thinking about how that how feeding sort of interacts with the naps as well. So I would encourage you to take a look at the Nanit sleep schedule generator as well. So, and I just wanted to mention again that we're very grateful to Newton Mattress and Coterie for sponsoring and Nanit for sponsoring this webinar this evening, and I'm so grateful that everyone has joined us. We've still got some more time and I will get to some more questions. What have we got here that we want to
somebody said,
Sure.
Put a comment in about using a sleep bag or a sleep sack for their baby around sleep. And
yes.
that being their cue is,
Yep.
okay, this is time to go to sleep. And I think that's fantastic. That's a really nice, easy solution there.
A really easy solution. And I wanted to just, I wanted to tack on to that. There was someone who had asked specifically about weighted sleeping bags, and I wanted to tackle that one. One of our collaborators, Professor Michael Gradisar, has published a really nice blog post recently about, weighted blankets and sleeping bags, showing that they make, and showing that all of the evidence is showing that they make no difference to sleep. They're not improving sleep. So I think they really are a marketing gimmick, I have to say. So I don't think they're going to be a magic bullet for you for helping your baby sleep. Look, if that particular brand of sleeping bag, your baby likes it and it works for your family, that's fantastic. But I don't want you to expect that a weighted sleeping bag is going to be, the magic solution to getting your babies to sleep.
And in this case, I think that a sleep sack without the weight is actually probably the cue that this person is talking about. And that's what 100%. I would say.
Yeah, no, 100%. I completely agree. Yes, no, I knew that's what you were mentioning. So I didn't mean it all to.
No, I'm glad that you brought it up, because I get that question all the time about these weighted sleep sacks, and there isn't that much research because those are hard studies to do.
But that said, I think a sleep sack or a sleeping bag is actually a really, really lovely thing for a baby to be wearing, in that it's a wearable blanket. We don't want, back to the safe sleeping environment, we don't want loose blankets in your baby's crib. So if you're worried about your baby being a little bit cold, absolutely put on a sleeping bag or a sleep sack over the top of them, which is a really lovely, safe way, to get that extra layer or extra extra blanket on top of them. So, okay.
I think it's like, just want to add on this, it is about the cues, and I was going to add that to the sleep, to the naps as well. And people who are writing in the chat about having trouble with naps and getting their children to nap. And I think sometimes sleep cues are often missed. And so it's, by the time you're sort of like, oh my goodness, this baby's so tired, it was probably a half hour before that period, right?
So to that point, Dr. Ordway, what are the sleep cues that people should be looking for those naps to help them, to help guide them to get their babies to sleep on time?
Yeah, I think, they kind of go from that being pretty active, and then there's a kind of brief amount of time where they just get a little more quiet. They might be a little clumsier or a little more sensitive to something not being, the first time they kind of shove that food off the table or something, it just start to be a little bit aware, I think maybe they're getting a little sleepy. By the time a baby or infant or even a 6-month-old, 9-month-old is crying, they're past that point, and then it becomes difficult for them to fall asleep. And so I think we had mentioned that sort of having that a similar routine that's around nap, and I think that sleep sack is something. I want to definitely look up Dr. Gradazar's study. I will say in clinic, I will recommend, not for babies, but toddlers, I will sometimes recommend a weighted blanket. And I think the literature comes more from the research that's been done with autism. And so there's seeing a lot of anxiety in toddlers and preschoolers. And so I think it's probably not necessarily helping them to sleep better or more soundly, but maybe a little bit shorter time to fall asleep, or a little bit more of a comfort. And I saw another chat where somebody was saying that their 20-month-old, I think, started to wake up and have more trouble about 2 or 3 months ago. And when I hear those kind of histories, I might ask, is there something that may have changed 2 or 3 months ago? Was there maybe a family trip, or was there a change in the household that might have just been enough to knock things a little out of whack? And so it's like, balancing your tires, sort of have to recalibrate them and get back to the schedule.
Yes. Okay. So let's get to a few more of the questions before we wrap up. Dr. Playforth, are there any that you have seen that you would like to address specifically?
I think that one of the questions that we had received was about eczema and food allergies, which is not necessarily related to sleep, but it's obviously something that a lot of babies struggle with. And I guess if it's really severe, then it can cause itchiness, and that does maybe interfere with sleep. But I think the question was suggestions to soothe the skin and to help prevent itching and scratching less, especially overnight. I think that, the person in the question, so the question says, besides cortisone and Eucrisa, do you have any other suggestions? This is definitely a question for your pediatrician. There are a lot of tips and tricks that you can try. I personally really like wet wraps for really bad flares, bleach baths, but you need to be very careful about doing those. And then cortisone is one option, but there are other medications as well. So I would talk to your pediatrician about it. But the mainstay for eczema is going to be treating it with the steroids to decrease the inflammation, and then doing a really nice thick layer of moisturizer to prevent further inflammation.
That's great. I love it. Thank you, Dr. Playforth. Well, this is a good one. I have a 3-week-old and she's a really noisy sleeper, grunting, etc. How can I tell she's awake or if she's just making a noise? So newborn babies can be really, really loud, and they can make a lot of noise in their sleep. Typically, if they are, if they're hungry or they're, needing your attention, they will make more noise than just grunting. They will be signaling to you and crying, and you will know that you need to be going to them. But it's fine for them to be making noise and just moving around a little bit. But Dr. Playforth, do you want to touch on that one a little bit more?
Yeah, babies snort, they grunt, they squirm, and it's really easy to jump to intervening, but some of that is actually them self-settling a little bit. So yeah, babies can be noisy. If you're concerned about it, particularly if you're concerned about, say, breathing, like congested sounded breathing or anything like that, take a video and take it to your pediatrician, and they'll be able to kind of help reassure you most of the time.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And Dr. Ordway, I'm going to get this one to you. I'd like to know a little more about cluster feeding. My daughter is 6 weeks old and I'm drained. You can answer that one.
Yeah, I mean, this is not a helpful answer, but it's a truthful answer, and that is go with it. Like, I think between 8 to 11, 7 to 10, there's just this period where it's just this intense sort of, every 45 minutes or an hour. So I think being sort of mentally prepared for it and knowing that it's short-lived. It usually, if you really sort of lean into it, as they say, it probably will last about 4 or 5 days or nights. And it's baby letting your body know. I used to say to parents, your body doesn't know if you had 2 babies, 1 baby, a 10-pound baby, or a 5-pound baby. And the way your brain knows to tell your breast how much milk to make is the amount of stimulation. And so they're cluster feeding to tell your brain, hey, make a little bit more milk. And that's a normal sort of transition. So lean into it as much as you can.
Great. Fantastic. Oh, this is a good one for Dr. Playforth. What are the signs of hypoglycemia? I'm wondering if my baby's waking because yes.
I don't see the question, but signs of hypoglycemia, the hypoglycemia is very, very rare, except in that immediate newborn period where, typically if the baby's at risk of hypoglycemia, they're going to be having their sugars checked. Obviously, babies with other health problems might have a higher propensity towards hypoglycemia, but I would not say that that's something I would worry about too much. I mean, some of the signs we look at are like a drop in the body temperature, more sluggishness, more sleepiness, not necessarily arousing quite as much, which doesn't tend to be a problem for a normal baby.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you. Now we're going to have to wrap up fairly soon. I'm so sorry to say that. And I'm sorry that we didn't get everybody's questions answered. Everyone will get an email of this recording, and we may be able to get to some of the unanswered questions a little bit later, perhaps in the community. But I we really wanted to thank Coterie and Newton mattresses for sponsoring our webinar, and of course for Nanit. So, we have a couple of offers from Coterie and Newton and Nanit that I wanted to mention. Coterie is offering 20% off your first order. So if you wanted to go to coterie.com, which is COTERIE.com, my accent is not great for everyone, so hopefully you got that. And use the code NANITSLEEP20 at checkout. You'll get 20% off your order. And Newton is offering 40% off a Newton Club mattress. So if you go to newtonbaby.com and use the code SAFESLEEP40, and that applies to orders of 199 or more. And I think you'll be getting an email with this information as well. And Nanit is offering you 20% off all Nanit camera purchases for Sleep Month. So if you go to nanit.com, and there's no code necessary for that. So, but I just wanted to thank everybody for joining. Thanks to Dr. Playforth and Dr. Ordway. It's just always so lovely to be with you both. And I hope people got some questions answered and got some good information. So thanks everybody for joining, and until next time.
Thanks for having us. Good night.
Thank you.